I'm going to get started. So, I'd like to start with a couple notes. One, a little housekeeping note. Um, an apology once again. So, those of you who tried to attend this the other day and were not able to because of my incompetence in technology, I sincerely apologize for you having booked time and not able to make our session. Um, these lovely ladies made it happen super fast. It took a long time to get the first one on. We got the second one on in like 48 hours. So I thank them very much. But it was a humbling moment. And I just wanted to remind everybody that we are going to go through humbling moments in this journey ahead. And that was my recognition. I was very triggered by my inadequacies. I felt embarrassed and humiliated in my inability to get a Zoom session going. And then, full disclosure, I was like, I'm going to go mow up my lawn. I got on my big mower and I'm running around my lawn and I'm letting this process. And I said, you know what? That just totally makes sense that everybody else is going to feel what I'm feeling. I'm not alone in this. The data in this report showed me I'm not alone in this. And I think that's one of the real values of having research like this feeling that we're not alone, and this feeling that I got, which is a bit of quick recovery from that, and feeling a sense of community in my embarrassment. So note number one. Note number two is session number one will be up and running on YouTube by the end of this. Our developers are getting it up. Session one will be cut on YouTube. If you go to agency.com on YouTube, you will find us, or just Agency 150, I think is where it's under. Um, and I guess I'll just kick right in then and ask you all who are on to put into chat as we open what you're hoping to get out of the session. You joined this for a reason. And whatever that reason is, we want to be of service to. So we'd like to know what it is. I can't promise we'll touch on everyone's points, what they put in chat, but we'll try to. We're going to navigate our way through this session to try to be as relevant as we can to your needs. So with that, I want to introduce my two colleagues here. Some of you know these folks. They are quite well known in our field, but I'm going to talk to the folks who might not know them in case there's anybody who doesn't know who Lisa Leahy is. I started this work based on Peter Senge's work in the 1980s. This is what got me into consulting. The learning organization was absolutely the core content that inspired me and taught me how to do the work that I do. So I was always sort of a learning org guy. And I was into my practice. I ran Bonfire. Catherine knows that. She was part of the firm. So other folks who are on, you might know who Bonfire was. We were doing strategy implementation, and it was so clear to us that the learning organization created the foundation for effective implementation. I read Lisa's work kind of late in the game, to be honest. I should have known it earlier, but when I did, it became so foundational to my practice and the work that I did at Oliver Wyman and work that I do with all my clients. I would not have the confidence and conviction to do the work the way I do it if it wasn't for Lisa Leahy. I actually presented some of your work this morning in another webinar, Lisa. So is learning organization central to the topic that we have in front of us? It might be the most central. I can make a case based on the data that there is nothing more important than creating the conditions for a learning environment for the work that we have ahead of us in this AI transformation. And you'll see the data momentarily. So thrilled to have Lisa. Amy, I didn't know until later in my career. I was a consultant for 15, 20 years when I was acquired by Oliver Wyman Group. And immediately when they came in and I was like the leadership development guy, they're like, oh, you know Mobius. I'm like, no, I don't know Mobius. They're like, you don't know Mobius? You don't know Amy Fox? You don't know this work? So I started talking to people about Mobius. And as I did, the number of stories about their lives being fundamentally changed was staggering. And again, I've been doing this work my whole adult life. And I had not at that point come across a firm that was doing deeper, more fundamental root cause level work with leaders as Amy and Mobius. And the proof was in the pudding. I saw people who are open and spacious when they weren't before. They are teaming and partnering and mentoring in ways that they weren't before. I mean, I heard so many stories. So, Amy's work fundamentally deals with this issue of trauma that we all have big T, little t trauma in our lives. And if we don't, as managers and leaders, understand where we come from, or as individual contributors, as performers, if we don't understand where we're coming from, and what is the nature of how we became the way that we are, then we're probably going to make a lot of the same mistakes again. And when it comes to learning and the kind of things that Lisa wants to give us, that's going to be very, very difficult to deal with our cognition and our own evolution mentally and cognitively if we don't understand ourselves emotionally and psychologically. So the work that Amy is doing, again, I can make a case, is the most fundamental work that we need to do right now in this AI transformation ahead of us. We're all triggered. We're all anxious. We have a level of stress that I was staggered by in the data that I saw. So the work of Amy and Lisa here, what they bring in their disciplines and their lenses to this discussion, I'm so thrilled about, because as I read the data, I called my friends and said, I want to be helpful here. I'm not building a research organization to provide analysis. I'm providing it to provide help and counsel. We're having these roadshows and these webinars because we're not just producing a report, we're producing actionable recommendations, thoughtful, deep, personal, root cause level recommendations to deal with the issues that we're all facing. So with that, I'm going to dive into the data in a moment after I just ask my two friends here. Lisa, maybe you can start. Why do you think this is an important conversation, and what excites you about what we're going to discuss today?
Hmm. Well, let's see. Multi-pronged. I will start by saying, in all truth, that because Gordon, you asked me, and because I am so fond of you, I was already in. So I'll start there. But I recognize that for myself, I have been one of those people who is like, AI, really? I mean, is this going to actually happen in some way, like head in sand, I would say. And so it felt to me like it was a really wonderful learning opportunity because I knew what you were going to be exploring. And that's only become even more so the case for me as I've had a chance to see the data that you've gathered and the analysis, and to see how you created this AI platform, and it's doing the thing that we're going to have an opportunity to dive into today. And, it's been very opening for me. So I really appreciate that personally. But the more I've been paying attention, the more I can feel the anxiety around me. And I can feel the ways that the, the coincidence of whatever factors are happening in our world is leading people to really feel quite beside themselves. And that moves me to want to be of a resource in whatever way that I can.
Lovely, Lisa. We're going to pull all of those resources that we can from you in the 40 minutes that we have. Amy, what excites you? What brings you to the conversation? You're on mute.
Sorry about
Now you're
that.
back.
I'll double click where Lisa started us. It is, of course, for me, hugely about our friendship and long-term collaboration, and also the honor and privilege and joy of dancing with Lisa, who's been a mentor and a friend and a sister for years and years. And if I answer it less personally, I would say that I think this is a moment people are finding kind of overwhelming and incomprehensible. And I think the research that you've done begins to give us some systemic lens for looking at the challenges people are facing and thinking together, exactly as you're inviting us to do on this call, what the remedies might be. And I think you've already sort of alluded to, Gordon, that this moment calls for deeper answers and deeper solutions than perhaps we've seen before in the field of organizational learning or adult development. And so I feel very excited and pregnant to have this conversation. I know that it's a super challenging moment, but I also feel hopeful that it's a moment that demands fresh thinking and fresh ways of working. And so I also see it as a very opportune moment to be thinking about these deeper, more profound questions about healing in the workplace, learning in the workplace, and
Awesome.
co-creativity. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, don't hold back. We have a limited time with this audience. I have a limited time with you on this topic, so just don't hold back. I'm going to go through the data. It'll take me about 15 minutes. For those online watching, it will be a bit pedantic for about 15 minutes. I'm going to walk through the data and uh, and then have a very rich discussion about the implications and what we do about it. Okay, so here we are. All right. Let me time it here, 42. Here we go. So for those of you who were not part of the research itself, many of you were clicking on that link when I sent it 3 months ago to take part in this study. But if you weren't a part of it, again, I'll speak to folks who might not know of what we were trying to do. Um, we wanted to do a study that was different than the others that we've read. When we read about the workplace, it's mostly quantitative with a little bit of qual, and you get a decent sense of where people's heads are, but you don't really understand where their hearts are. We wanted to get beneath the surface and excavate, Amy's word, excavate the inner terrain. I think you both use these phrases of our participants in the study so we can really understand what does this workplace evolution mean for them right now. We had a hunch that the expectations that started changing about a decade ago were continuing to stretch, that we're seeing breakage, that what employees expected from work and what employers wanted from work and wanted out of their employees was continued to change and create more and more gap between those perspectives. That was our hunch. And then comes COVID, and then comes AI, and then comes social justice and a variety of other things in the past 5 years. And we knew that these evolutions were fracturing. We saw it in our own lived experience, but we didn't really know what it meant. So we sent our AI, and we've trained an AI, and this is what Agency 150 is about. And Vega is our AI. We've trained to do behavioral interviewing. So we sent her out to interview over 900 people now. I think we cut this when it was a little over 700 individuals from around the world, individual contributors, managers, and leaders, cross industries, cross regions. And we got some very interesting information about these questions, which you'll see in a minute. We used AI again as the interviewer, but also as the analyst. We've trained our AI in a variety of really interesting organizational analysis, psychological tools. So she's able to break the data down for us in interesting ways. And we had our own advisors sort of go through that data over the last several weeks. So it's been a human and technology partnership going through the data. And now here we are at step 3, having some discussions. So what we really wanted to understand on the left-hand side, what is this disconnect between employers and employees when it comes to their worldviews and expectations? What is the emotional and cognitive fallout of this evolution and this time of tumultuous change? And what do we actually do about it? What are the solutions to unlock potential? This idea that there is potential that humans are holding and not giving to their organizations. We wanted to know what percentage of that human potential, their skills, their passions, their creativity, are they holding back or offering? So we asked that quantitatively. So we're going to talk about the evolution of our workplace, our conditions, the techniques that we use to get that potential met. So here's the questions on the right-hand side: beliefs about expectations changing, scores about individual potential, and a corporate ability to harness and convert that potential into enterprise value, feelings about AI, experiences about being recognized, priorities around programs and the barriers that are either holding them back or they need out of the way to do their best work. And then again, ideas and solutions for improvement and messaging. So this is what we discussed. We're going to present the expectations in terms of polarities. We're going to express the cognitive and emotional experience in personas, and our AI built these personas for us. We pressure tested them over and over again, and they held tight. So we'll show you those to get to know who are these personalities, and if we're going to help our population, maybe a psychographic orientation, a recognition that everyone has different needs. They're in different places on the change curve. And a thorough discussion of that helps us build programs and investments and support to get everybody moving to that upper right quadrant of realized potential and of skills and competencies living into our new reality. So I'll start here. When you do AI-based analysis and you're looking for frequency data, like, okay, what did we hear? We talked to 700 people. What did we hear? And our AI gives us something like this. As I shared on the last webinar, I find this absolutely useless. This is the kind of stuff that you get out of a lot of tools. It doesn't really tell you anything other than the kind of words that people are saying. And I wanted to show this as a contrast for what you'll see in a second. So then when we put a sentiment analysis filter through that data, when we now look for tone, we look for specific language that has sentiment that could be highly alarming or very positive or anywhere in between. We look for that in context. AI has about 14 different steps it has to go through the process of doing summarization. And some of these additional steps that we've trained her on allow us to do this in a pretty rich way. So when you look at this map again, of the most frequently said words, and then you look at it through the filter of emotionality, you see even things like career progression and benefits have the tone of overwhelm, have substance that has to do with job security. So now we're starting to get somewhere. Okay, that what we're seeing and observing, maybe at a superficial level from our employees, that gives us a certain level of understanding. But when we get beneath the surface, we realize even the day-to-day things that we think are going well or that might be positive in their lives aren't necessarily so. So when you look at this in terms of how people are feeling from anxious to uncertain to generally positive or neutral to positive to enthusiastic, you see that about 50% of our population is anywhere from uncertain to freaked out. So if you think about your teams or you think about your total population of your organization and imagine 50% of them that might be hiding, might be fearful of expressing, might be showing up like they know what's going on, but putting a very surface level veneer over their reality. As Lisa describes, a foot on the gas, but another foot on the brake. How much foot on the brake? What we're seeing here? More than we expect and more than what's useful for sure. When we ask them about their unrealized potential, how much of yourselves are you bringing forward or holding back? And they're saying about 2/3. The other third, I'm kind of keeping to myself. What are they saying? My leadership skills are sitting on a shelf. I'm never asked to use them. I have so many creative ideas, but there's no time or support to try them out. So when you look at the content on the slide, and I'll take a second for you to just absorb it. When you think about profitability, when you think about productivity, when you think about outcomes, when you think about your KPIs, when you think about 1/3 of the energy of the workforce just sitting there, this one gets me kind of fired up. I mean, I feel the pain for human beings who feel like they have to hold themselves back, that they don't have the venues that bring their creativity and passions forward. And I feel badly for organizations that are losing so much human capital, so much intellectual capital. When we ask them about generally, how do your organizations do? If you think about companies like yours and its ability to convert potential like you have into enterprise value, how well does your organization do? And again, it's a similar data point. You'll see that the scores, this person says, I said 40, we have a long way to go. Leadership only values client-facing work. I can recognize a consulting firm or that kind of orientation that you don't really feel valued, you don't feel recognized, you don't feel like you're heard if you're not in the sweet spot of the company, wherever that might be. So we know that people are holding stuff back. We know that companies have a long way to go to be able to convert potential into value. And when we think about the kind of change and opportunity we have with AI, let's think about like how important this is. So when you think about expectations, this was a really critical section for me. I've learned in my life, and I think it's generally true, that much of life's disappointment has to do with expectations. Expectations that we have that might be unrealistic for any set of reasons. Well, we have expectations as employers about our people. We have expectations as employees about our organizations. And when you look at a slide like this, you see that foundationally, we're at odds. Now, I'd like to have Lisa and Amy weigh in on this when I'm done. And if you could share some of your real life experience on this one. Like, how does this really show up? Because many of my clients say, oh, flexibility control, we just need to tell them where we stand here. The issue is just we didn't message this better. Or meaning and purpose. We should remind people, send some emails out about, why we're here and what we do. So for many clients, they think that this is an easy solve, that this is just explaining things or spending more time in communications or maybe some training. This for me feels like foundational beliefs and worldviews and expectations about what I want from work that are fundamentally different between the employee and the employer, or said differently, in the time of change that we're in, the degree of change, we're in survival, and we're seeing this in the data. You saw the urgency and the anxiety in the earlier slides. So what I see here are two populations that are operating in some degree of a survival mechanism to their environment. And employees are saying, in this moment in time, I need more control over my life. And executives saying, no, I need more control over you. Employees saying, I need more meaning and purpose. Employers saying, no, I need you at work. People saying, I need more transparency. They're like, no, actually, we need to control what you get and how you get it. We're tired of coddling you. We're tired of giving you what you want. It's time for us, and it's time to get stuff done. So this is a really interesting notion. And I know that polarity is something that we all talk about, Amy, Lisa, and I, in the work that we do. And when there is this degree of polarity across these topics, there's more work to be done than sending messages. There's a reconciliation. And I do think there's some work. And somebody asked in chat, how do we connect the nervous system to this content? And I think this discussion starts teeing up the nervous system here. So Amy, I'd love for you to talk about this a little bit about what demands are executives feeling upon themselves that would cause them to operate from a sense of fear or survival, and what does that do to these paradoxes where employees want flexibility, meaning, transparency, growth, and well-being. So we're not going to dive too deeply into this today. It's in the report. You can go to agency150.com and download the report, but we're going to keep going and talk about the personas. Okay, staying on time here to the best I can. When we look at all of the data, about 800 interviews, 700 and change when we pulled, we asked the AI to give us 3 to 5 personas that are most illustrative to the data, that is encompassing of all of these humans and these personalities. How can you bucket these into archetypes and personas in an elegant way? This was pretty much how it gave it to us. They called this the anxious, it wasn't the builder. I changed the word builder. I think it was executor or something like that. I didn't change very many words at all. This is the AI telling us in their own language how they interpret the personalities and archetypes across the population of the data. Only about 10 to 15% not included. So this covers 85 to 90%. So we need to know these personalities: the anxious builder, the disengaged traditionalist, the overworked pragmatist, and the purpose-driven striver. We need to know who these people are and how they're behaving so we can help them. The anxious builder. And I'm going to go pretty quickly through this. We don't have a whole lot of time, and I want to have the conversation. So these are individuals that you might recognize because they're doing what they're told. They're executing on your strategy. They're building away, and you might not know that they're anxious because they feel inspired and they're doing the work. Now, they say they often feel overwhelmed by the volume of the work, but they're kind of in the realm, and you can see it from her face, we're not going to let you see a sweat here. We're going to get this stuff done. We're going to look good. So they're excited. They're concerned about their jobs. If you go to the left-hand column here, they're overwhelmed. And here's some of the words that they use in their language: changing, technology, fast, overwhelmed, job security, hectic. What do they need? They need clear communication. They need support. They need ethical guidelines. They want to be helpful. They're being helpful today. It just feels for them to some degree that they're building their own prisons. They don't know what AI is going to do for them. They're fearing about their jobs, but they're just doing what they're told, anxious on what am I doing to myself here? The disengaged traditionalist. And I said this in my last webinar, and I apologize to my previous colleagues, but many senior people in consulting firms that I've known feel a lot like this cat here on screen. Frustrated, skeptical, disconnected. They're just frustrated that work's changing so fast, so much. They like the way that their job's been over the years. They're effective at it. Many people skew in this persona to a more senior role. Not totally, but they skew here. And they just struggle with remote work. They struggle with the new generation. He looks like he's struggling, right? So apathy, boredom, his emotional state, seeking, stability and security. What do they need? They need consistent communication. They need a sense of belonging. They may resist change. They need to feel a part of the journey. And they also need to feel like they're being helpful to others. So there's a role that they can play. And I don't know if we're engaging them effectively. Just because they're resistant doesn't mean that they can't be tremendously valuable and provide their wisdom and experience along the journey, but they do need to show up and try more and experiment more. So we need to help them do that. What are things that they say? I love this line. It seems to me that not enough people now are focused on actual results. Quote number 3 on the left-hand column. Okay. I'm focused on results. I don't know what all these people are doing, experimenting here, trying all these new tools. I'm getting stuff done. So you're going to hear that kind of tone from this audience. Next is the purpose-driven striver. Now, if there are 4 quadrants, which there always is, if you're a consultant, there's a 2x2 somewhere. She's in the top right-hand corner. These are the most inspired and effective of the group, but they're also hungry and they're not getting what they need in an organization. It's all about get it done, micromanagement, I'm on you, I need you at work. That's not really how they operate, but they are inspired about the future. So they're driven, they're motivated. Again, left-hand column, they want flexibility, they want growth. They want clear communication and feedback. They need culture of respect and trust. They want more balance. Like they're going to pour it out. They'll pour it out until they're burned out. They'll just keep going and going. So you need to help them with their well-being. They're strivers. Again, the AI chooses this language very intentionally. Bottom quote, I want more purpose and meaning from my work. I want to enjoy what I do with and whom I do it with. I want folks to appreciate what I do. Now, I can channel some of my executive clients here, and they're kind of squinting their nose. They're doing a little crinkle nose at that last quote. Oh, okay. Purpose and meaning. You need to enjoy what you do. How nice for you. I hear a lot of this rhetoric from executives that look at people like her and say they're being overly coddled. I'm not going to give her appreciation every day. I didn't get that. I'm not going to give it to them. And I get that. I honestly do understand after the last 5 years why that MO is sort of present. But I will also counsel executives, if you hear yourself in that voice, it's not going to get you where you want to go. I'll just leave it there. Like I get, like we don't want to over coddle, and you have a view about that. I hear you. You distancing yourself from that generation with this kind of language will not be helpful. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. The last of our personas, the overworked pragmatist, just trying to get the job done, feels overworked and underappreciated, increasing demands, values efficiency and clear direction. Why does everyone have to do this new stuff here? Like we're fine doing it the way that we're doing it. I'm doing it fine. I'm healthy. I'm executing. I'm productive. Get out of my way. So when they hear about these changes, they're stressed. They're anxious. They're frustrated. This is not how they want to operate. They want less work, clear priorities. We can recognize that in the state of overwhelm and dramatic, unprecedented change, there's going to be a big portion of your population who lives in this quadrant. This is how they talk. The pace, more meetings, I'm exhausted. There's a large gap between strategy and execution, wasted effort. They want to do a good job. You can hear their tone, but experimenting, trying new things in this realm of reinvention, they need help. So you can see them in the quadrants, from presence to disconnection, from contraction to expansion. You can see sort of where they live. I can't spend a lot of time with the amount we have here with our colleagues, but you can see that everyone needs something different. And if you don't identify different personalities, and if you think it's a one shot fits all or a one size fits all or a shotgun sort of approach, it's not how it's going to work for this AI transformation. This data is pretty clear that different people need different things. They're at different stages of the evolution. The more personal that we can be, the more human we can be, the more connected we can be, the more effective we're going to be as leaders in this transformation. So, what are they telling us to do? What is the AI saying? And in many ways, this could feel like table stakesy content. Invest in reskilling and development. Embrace transparent and empathetic communication. Focus on meaning, purpose. Oh, sorry. There we go. And value. So when I presented this to others, I've heard that feedback. This feels like stuff that we've been saying for a long time. Um, and I think there is a human truism that has been true over time of what humans need in times of change and transformation. And I think that's the case. I would modulate this up a bit in your expectations. The necessity for reskilling right now. You will lose people very quickly. Embracing empathetic and transparent communication. There's already foot on the brake. There's already resistance. You're already getting people in a state of overwhelm, operating in survival. So if you want people operating in their survival mechanisms, as Amy will talk to you about amygdala hijacks and talk about prefrontal lobe and the frontal cortex not operating optimally and what that does to our logical thinking, our pragmatism. So we'll talk about this. So I would modulate this up and recognize that humans need this now in a bigger way than they had before, that the level of stress and anxiety in my 30 years has reached a fever pitch that I have not observed. And the work that we need to do as leaders, it's just different. And we're going to talk about why it might be different. So that's the download. I appreciate you dealing with a very long, but comprehensive view of this data. Let me just start with you, Lisa, if I could. And I'm going to keep the slides up if you'd like me to move around. And if you want me to take them down, we'll take them down. But Lisa, as you hear this and you look at it from a developmental perspective and you think about what your years of discipline and training has brought to you and give us a lens on this, what's the first thing that feels important or provocative?
The first thing is the set of data points around polarities. And that stands out to me because I think it's just a beautiful encapsulation of one of the ways we tend to get ourselves in trouble, both organizationally and as individuals, which is we end up seeing things in a very either or fashion. And one of the things I think is so beautiful about what this actually represents is to basically go to, Barry Johnson's polarity management work, which is you must have both of these things. You've got to have flexibility and you've got to have control. And to see this as, well, the bad guys are thinking this way and the good guys are thinking this way. Oh, but wait a second. We're the good guys and you're the bad. We get into ways where we separate ourselves from our own wisdom around the need to have both of these things operating. So to me, it's encapsulating organizationally the ways we also get ourselves into trouble at an individual level where we're thinking or believing, if I don't have X, then I can't do Y. And it just gets so reified and so like black and white that we lose our ability to actually be learners. And I think to me, that's, in the end, that's the kind of the bigger order for me, which is how are we going to create the conditions for everyone in the system to be learners? And to go back to, your original comments there, Gordon, about having a learning organization. And this is, I think, a great entry point to it.
Really effective starting point with polarities for the discussion we're about to have. And Amy, I'd love for you to weigh in on this and this idea that we need to have both. How do we have both right now? Like, how do we hold when we have these paradoxical feelings, and we have, depending on where we are in the hierarchy, an anchoring perhaps on the spectrum in one place or another. Tell us about like how do we live with this, or what else is provocative to you?
Yeah, I mean, I love that Lisa took us here, and two things strike me. One is the risk of sort of bifurcating a right-wrong dance between these obviously needed polarities, as Lisa's suggesting, and that we can get sort of stereotyped and rigidified by hierarchy of saying, we're on this side of the polarity and we're on the other side, and then you start to have a greater, ever greater trust breach inside the workplace. That's actually unnecessary because, as Lisa said, every organization needs some dimensionality of both sides. I think the other thing that's true is that there is a sort of generational sea change represented by the demography of these polarities, and therefore we're at risk of the workforce not understanding the other side of the polarity, not only
Yes.
discounting it and making it wrong, but actually not even comprehending the principles, the values, the priorities, the needs that it represents for the other side.
Mm,
So, in my mind, Gordon, part of the answer is a much greater dialogue between the generations in the workforce and the perspectives in the workforce. I feel like we have to educate ourselves afresh in a plurality of perspectives in order to emerge somehow with a new point of view. Because otherwise, we're just going to be in this really endless and frustrating debate.
mm,
So that's one thing I would say.
Yeah.
The other thing that strikes me in the data just generally, and you alluded to this at the end of your presentation, Gordon, is of course the need for organizational learning and empathy and reskilling is ongoing. And we're at a moment that's so disruptive and so meaningfully scary to people that you start to get lots of words in the data that point to people feeling a existential threat and a sense of terror and a sense of anxiety. And so everything that one might do, like dialogue or a listening tour or town halls or Q and A's with senior leaders, has to be put in a context where we put real attention on how to create safety and inclusion and open-heartedness in those settings, or else we're putting people into a context in which they're going to try to talk to each other and it's going to break down because everybody's in a fight or flight mode. And I can say more
mm,
at some point about what that looks like neurologically, but I think it's an important thing to realize that people have a hard time learning, have a hard time processing new information, have a hard time demonstrating cognitive fluidity, the ability to refine and mature my point of view when I'm scared and when I'm under threat. So we're asking people to be open to persuasion and to be interested in points of divergence at a moment when actually their brain is telling them to protect themselves and shut down.
mhm.
Well, let's stay with
I
that.
think,
I'd love for Lisa, let me just poke the question. You might be going here,
yeah.
but the question is like, if you look at the spectrum, I'm anchoring further on the side because I'm in survival. I'm anchoring further that side because I'm in survival. So if we want to have dialogue, that's great. But do executives recognize I'm micromanaging more because why? Like, what is it in me that's causing me to do? Like, I don't know if there's awareness of the
Mm,
inner experience that's causing the extended polarities, to push on the edges of those polarities as much as they are. So they're coming together. We need to have those discussions in town halls, but don't we need to recognize that we're pushing ourselves to the edges, maybe
mm.
unconsciously? And maybe, Lisa, this is where you're going to go, but why don't you pick that up?
Yeah. I think the my main connection to what Amy is saying is that most people are not aware of how they're actually feeling. And if you ask people in the survey, you were able to get it because you're specifically drawing for how are you experiencing yourself. But most people are not. And most people are just going about doing their work and doing it at whatever levels. And we can see from the data are actually quite high and strung up, strung out. And I think one of the things that happens for many people is that when they start um, being unaware, they are just in a mode of I have just got to get these things done, and they're not looking actually to connect with other people. They're not connecting with themselves. And if you are in the ocean in your organization where just that's just the way everything is going on here. This is just the way we be. I think it makes it very difficult for people to step out and to even say, hey, just imagine you're one of the leaders in the organization. Hey, I'm feeling anxious about this. That would be like a very difficult thing, I think, for someone to say. It's just so countercultural. And I think we're walking around with beliefs that we should not actually be feeling what we're feeling, which keeps us from acknowledging what we're feeling. And there's a whole set of beliefs about how emotions are bad and are counter to our work that I think we really would have to be opening up the aperture for people to just invite in and see how having a conversation first with yourself about how you're feeling actually can be very high value connecting yourself to yourself. And as I've sat in rooms with leaders, especially in leadership teams, when this stuff gets talked about, it's like such a breath of fresh air for people who feel like, well, oh my God, I thought I was the only one who was feeling like this. And the sense of greater connectivity and, okay, well, at least now we can relax a little bit and then be responsive to what's happening rather than being in this highly reactive state.
Yeah, I love what Lisa's saying, and maybe I'll just build on it for a second. The absence of fear literacy and emotional self-connection is part of this, the water that people are swimming in that has people reacting in these less than productive ways. So I do an exercise often in my leadership programs where I ask people to pick a recent moment that they were really upset and to journal the emotions they felt in that moment. And you get an array of emotions if you give them time to reflect on it, because as Lisa said, people are not often in touch in the workplace minute by minute by what's going on in their interiority. But they'll say, I was anxious, I was disappointed, I felt disrespected, I felt frustrated. They very rarely say I was afraid. But when you then ask them in that moment of upset, when you felt all those things, how did you behave? What they give you are a very truncated set of fight flight behaviors. I yelled, I shut down, I walked away, I pounded the floor, whatever it is. And, it's very obvious with a little bit of familiarity in the neuroscience of an amygdala hijack that what's happening is a predictable shutting down of their frontal cortex, flooding of adrenaline and cortisol to their extremities, and a narrowing of the behavioral repertoire to primitive survival options. And that's happening every day in the workplace, but underneath people's awareness, they don't realize that they're flooded with fear. They don't realize they're flooded with adrenaline, and they don't realize that their full executive repertoire isn't available to them in that moment. So I think
Mm.
one of the most important learning or reskilling objectives we have to have in the workplace right now is increasing people's individual and collective awareness of the dynamics of fear in team dynamics, as Lisa said, in organizational learning and readiness to ask for help, readiness to make mistakes, readiness to collaborate in cross-functional and cross-boundary ways. All the competencies for innovation and adaptation that we need are narrowed by the level of fear, which is going up and up and up. That's the first thing. The second thing Lisa said that I also just want to underscore is we're asking people to have increasing empathy, but we're still living in an organizational culture in which it's imagined you can check your emotions at the door. And until we come to the fundamental recognition that that's just not possible, emotions are hardwired to us. Every conversation has an emotional dimension. Every relationship has a level of trust and rapport and generosity and care that people are constantly assessing. And the longing is for intimacy in the workplace. Every leader that I've ever met will describe at some point in my coaching with them the level of loneliness and isolation they feel when trying to tackle their toughest problems, when trying to approach a different generation in the workplace for a conversation, when trying to give or solicit feedback. And that isolation is a pandemic inside of organizational life that I think we're going to have to address if we're going to try to move forward with some of the things, Gordon, that your research suggests is urgent.
Yeah, it's so interesting. The clients that we're talking to all focus on reskilling. It's so important to reskill. And they think about technical skills,
Right.
sometimes management and leadership skills, which is good, collaborative skills, which is good. But what about self-regulation? Like if we don't actually become
Mhm.
better at self-regulation, then none of it matters. Like none of the other things will work. I mean, like we're planting the seeds of AI and of collaboration of leadership. We're building these skills. We're planting the seeds in totally frozen soil, and we're not spending the time nourishing the soil. And that's one of the reasons, Lisa, that I just thought it was so critical to have you on to talk about how do we set these conditions? How do we set the soil to give people space for that self-reflection and self-regulation and the kind of dialogue about fear and anxiety that we're not having today, which again is the doorway in my mind to the actual technical reskilling that we're shooting for.
Yes. Yeah. And I know you both are very familiar with the immunity to change process, which is very much intended to try to help people to recognize that they do operate unconsciously in a way where they are in self-protection mode. And when you do this exercise with people and they can see, oh, yes, there's a part of me, which you spoke so beautifully to when we started, Gordon, that is like just humiliated. Like, I want to avoid being humiliated, but you make it public with other people who you're with. There's something that's so connecting for people to realize I'm not the only person who's worried about looking weak for feeling the way that I do, or for feeling like I don't really know what to do in this situation. Whether you're a leader or an individual contributor, who knows what to do in this moment? No one can say they know what to do. And this is what is making, I think the level of anxiety be so palpable, which is
Yeah.
this is of a scale and scope that nobody has ever actually faced in their life, in our
Yeah.
lifetimes.
The AI, when I asked for provocative headlines, we're in the data and we're pushing it through and we're going through it. And I just said, what headlines can you give us that illuminate the data that is countercultural or against the mainstream understanding? What is actually counterintuitive or provocative in the data? And it had a couple points that the AI really wanted to express. So Vega basically said, there's a thing called the experience paradox here, Gordon. The experience paradox means nobody has a playbook, nobody knows where they're going, so you can't look anywhere else. So when the leader has typically looked to a colleague or the board, or a manager looks at the leader, or an employee looks at the man, like there's nowhere to look, there's no playbook, no one knows where they're going. So as you say, there's a different kind of anxiety in that. The other thing that they were surprised by, Vega said she was surprised that the anxiety was just as high for senior people as it was for junior people. That while we might be kind of showing up looking like we know what we're doing, we're hiding it better, perhaps. But that was surprising, as well as the idea that I thought that the younger generation is just experimenting more than the older generation. Like in the world of work, then you would imagine millennials, Gen Zs, they're in the population doing more cutting edge stuff and trying everything. Well, that's not totally true. They do at home, but they don't do it at work. They don't feel safe doing it at work. I can't tell you the number of respondents that we had that were in the younger generation that say, I will try this on my own, but I won't do it here. So, how do we, in the last few minutes, help employees, managers, leaders in this context of this experience paradox? No one knows where they're going. We are
Yeah.
in a state of instability, anxiety. So we're not operating with our full brains on full tilt. What would you suggest with the remaining minutes would be like the path forward? What are the first steps that you would suggest that our participants pay attention to?
Yeah, I'll just offer a couple things and then Lisa, please build on what I'm saying. I mean, I think the first thing is we have to get out of a paradigm of the expert knower as equivalent to the leader. And move from the notion that if I don't know, that's humiliating, and instead come to treasure the humility of not knowing and
Beautiful.
sort of adventure of being at the cutting edge of the unknown. So one has to cultivate, I think, really contemplative practices of spaciousness, stillness, receptivity, intuition, the sort of softer feminine dimensions that will allow us to dance with the mystery of the constantly unknown in a way that's soft and porous and fluid, and not sort of moving into a sort of trying to control and manage what's unmanageable. So there are sort of qualities or mindsets, I think, that have been undervalued in the workplace that we're going to now have to learn to treasure. And our definition of leadership, I think, is going to shift as a result of that. So to start to look out into the workplace for those people that are natural conveners, those people that are natural, as you said, Gordon, experimenters, those people that are sort of fascinated by the fresh ideation of the unknown, and support those people to grow and flourish, which is a very different lens for looking at talent and potential, I think. I don't know, Lisa,
Mm.
what would you add?
I love what you said, Amy, and I would just pick up on this shift from the expert
Mm,
is so important because the implication is that as a leader, one needs to also see him, her, themselves as a learner. And
exactly.
so often the model is I'm supposed to know. And I think one of the things that was so wonderful where it happened during COVID was that leaders did not know what to do, and nobody expected them to. And it was a relief for them that allowed them to change up their repertoire of just how they it acted with other people. And I saw so many leaders become much more collaborative around how are we going to do this together and allowing the feelings of, wow, this is very scary. None of us really does know what's happening here. And just even the physical safety danger that people are experiencing. So I feel like there's just the shift from the expert is a great way to put it. And I would just add to that a recognition that all of us are walking around with a mental model around like in our intelligence and our capacities. And nowhere, at no time is like Carol Dweck's distinction this kind of important of if we cannot see challenges as opportunities, we will begin to close down and we will shut down and we will not be able to learn from them. And that's the opportunity to be, I think I'm going to use another word you used, Amy, humble, which is not only you're not expert, but you have to actually be in process and be in your un unfolding in a public way that is vulnerable making. And that is what it is to model being a leader who's a learner.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that has two implications, Lisa. It's the vulnerability and authenticity, or the willingness to self-disclose on the part of a leader, uh,
Yes.
on the one hand. And on the other hand, I think it's also an organization that builds in time for integration and self-reflection. So if we're
Yes.
just in constant action, we won't have that natural impulse of learning afresh and synthesizing what's emerging from each experiment. So I think we have to have much more time for mutual reflection and deconstruction. After action reviews, we've called it over the years, that we've
Yes.
historically built into the flow of work.
Wonderful. And I think having those will also build the muscle that is woefully weak for most people of even being aware of what is happening for them in the moment. And the more the space gets created and it's deliberate around reflecting, stepping back, how are we doing? It helps people to get a little bit of distance to be checking in with themselves and what they see. The balcony perspective here is just so essential. And I love the creating of those opportunities in a regular way.
Yeah, and if I could be slightly more radical, Gordon, than you dared to be about self-regulation, I think the skill set that's needed is co-regulation. I think we
Mm,
have to learn to be the ground for one another when we can't be that for ourselves. And that
mhm.
suggests a kind of mutual generosity, tenderness, attunement in the workplace that people are not currently skilled in, but can learn. And it also suggests that each of us has to have some daily somatic practice or grounding practice so that we can offer that to our colleagues when they need it. I think that's going to be an essential leadership skill, actually.
I love you both. That was an awesome close in terms of real pragmatic and important work for people to do. I just want to emphasize one or two things. One, when Amy describes the more feminine work to do here, to you macho men out there who might hear that and gristle, I think you know this, but I'll be clear that these softer skills are the hardest things to develop. If you want to be tough, if you want to be a great leader, if you want to be dominant and aggressive and performance or whatever those things are, if you think that vulnerability and curiosity and humility are inconsequential on that path, you will learn some lessons. So I really appreciate that. I will offer a quote from Vega. This was something that when she wrote this down, when she typed this in, I was just like, okay, I'm taking the night off. She said, "Please remind your viewers, Gordon, that it is human creativity and connection, in parens, not automation, that will define the future of work. Please remind these human beings that it's their human creativity and connection, not automation, that will define the future of work." So human creativity and connection, their AI is telling us, do not lose this, people. Don't look to us for this. You do you, we'll do us. Like, we need you to be you. So these deep human, and you might say feminine, soft, personal, humanistic, whatever you want to call them, these traits are what is going to get us through this time, no doubt. When I asked for the couple steps, humility and creativity is what Vega, she offered my client as the first two steps, humility and vulnerability, or curiosity and vulnerability. So with Amy, I'd like to close with this idea of having a practice like breathing. Take a moment to breathe. This is my thing, so I'm going to offer it at the end here. This is a very difficult time we're in. We are going to be in a very challenging, complicated, chaotic time for, I don't know, quite some distance into the future. And as we walk into the future and as we lead others into the future, the role that we play and how human we are, it's just monumentally important. And I appreciate spending some time talking about that. So if you're interested in what we're doing here at Agency 150 or with Vega, you can write me. I'm right now really wanting to help with this material and what we have in front of us. And I just want to thank you both so much, Lisa and Amy. I adore you, and you offered some really important wisdom. So hopefully you'll share this with your friends, folks who are on, and you're sending us some messages. Thank you for this beautiful conversation, says Lori. And with that, thank you all. And you'll have 2 minutes before your next meeting.
Take care, everybody.
Be well, everyone.
Thank you. Bye now.